Hi guys. So it seems that Molly has been exposed to COVID, which means that I've been exposed to COVID. I've only had the one shot, not both yet. So that means I'm going to stay home for a little while. We think Molly is actually recovered or mostly recovered now. She's only had some mild symptoms and they're gone. So she's getting a test on Wednesday, and hopefully, if she ever had it, it will all be clear by then. So hopefully I will be coming back in just a few days. Um, but we'll see. Anyway, last time I left you, we were talking about the Vietnam War, and we talked about some pros and cons, some reasons for it, some reasons against it. Um, One thing to remember is just that it's a very messy war. A lot of people have very strong opinions on it, but it was just really messy. All wars are messy, but in World War II, there was very clear good guys and very clear bad guys, and there's a lot of differences of opinion in the Vietnam War. So just take that for what it is. Let's see what actually happened. So the Vietnam War really kicked off with the Gulf of Tonkin incident and resolutions. So Lyndon Baines Johnson increases the number of advisors in South Vietnam. They're just there to advise and train. But then in 1964, hard destroyers were fired upon by North Vietnamese torpedo boats in the Gulf of Tonkin, which is just off the coast of northern Vietnam. Maybe. It is quite possible that this was actually a false alarm. Apparently, years after the war, a sonar guy uh, let the news out that sometimes when the waves are chopping just right, they sound like a certain type of torpedo propeller. So if the waves are going whoosh, 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 whoosh at just the right frequency, it does alert the computers that there's a torpedo firing when there's not actually a torpedo firing. So the whole incident that kicked off the Vietnam War may have been an accident. Either way, no torpedo hit an American ship, whether they fired and missed, or they fired and it was dud, or they didn't actually fire at all and it was just waves. I don't know. Um, it would be kind of crazy if the Vietnam War started with an incident that didn't actually happen, but there you go. So Congress passes the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which says use all necessary measures to repel attacks on American soldiers. It gave the president the right to use the army in Vietnam to whatever extent he felt like. Now, the Constitution says that Congress needs to declare war and peace. And Congress says we're not going to declare war, but you can shoot them if you want. So Congress is giving up its responsibility to the president. I do think this is unconstitutional. I do not think Congress should have let the presidents, and there are going to be many presidents during the Vietnam War. I don't think Congress should have just told them do whatever they want. I think Congress had a job to do, vote on whether or not to declare war, and they wouldn't do it. And Congress has done that multiple times since Vietnam. They found out this loophole where they're like, yeah, Constitution says we have to declare war, but we're not going to declare war. We're just going to let the president make the choices, and then we can criticize or pat him on the back, and it's no skin off our back. And we've done that in Iraq and Afghanistan. We've done that all over the place. And I do think Congress needs to get back to taking back that power, deciding when and when not to go to war. But there you go. Allows the president to wage war without actually declaring war. So Johnson says we're going to ramp up our soldiers, and in the meanwhile, we're just going to bomb North Vietnam to smithereens. The Viet Cong are the guerrilla fighters in South Vietnam. They are more like a militia. The NVA is the North Vietnamese Army. So previously, it's been mostly these unofficial militias fighting. Now it's going to be the official army as well. March 6, 1965, our first combat troops were sent on a defensive mission, but they're still ready for combat. Those are Marines. Then in July, a few months later, he says we're just going to send out all our soldiers to Vietnam. General Westmoreland was the commander there, and there's a picture of him in your book. So we escalate, then they escalate. By 1965 or 67, sorry, we have about 500,000 soldiers in Vietnam. So we are no longer advisors or trainers. We're full out combat. Uh, Politics always plays a big role in fighting. There are quite often military decisions that are not made for military reasons, but they're made for political reasons. But during the Cold War, politics is going to play a much larger role in our fighting. And Vietnam really saw this. We saw this a little bit with Korea, where MacArthur said, we're going to win the war, and the only way to win the war is invade China and use nukes and go full out World War III. And Truman says, no, we're not going to win the war. We're going to have a truce. We're going to go back to the way things were instead of winning. And in America, the politicians command the soldiers. So when there is a difference of opinion between the military and the politicians in America, the politicians win. Uh, a lot of people do think that the politicians meddled way too much in Vietnam, though, and did not allow the military to do their job, and unfortunately made things a lot worse. See, most politicians have no clue about military things. I mean, I don't have a whole lot of clues about military stuff. So the more politicians are involved in military strategic planning, the less effective it's going to be. Vietnam is very tall and skinny, and that would make for really good front lines that we could push and we could defend across the entire border, which is very small. But they are just going across the border into neighboring countries like Laos and Cambodia. And America has to play by the rules. America's not allowed to invade Laos and Cambodia because we're not at war with them. The Vietnamese don't care about the rules. And that makes it really frustrating for us when we have to follow the rules and they don't. And it gives them an obvious superior advantage, a huge advantage that they don't have to play nice, but we do have to play nice. I see things like this a lot in sports. When our team complains that the other team's cheating or playing rough or playing unfair, we're like, well, you have to play nice. You have to play fair. You're not going to intentionally foul. Don't do that. Well, how come they get to play rough and we don't? Well, sorry, I'm not their principal. I am yours. So play nice, even if they're not. We can't always use our most effective weapons. I mean, not just nukes. If we nuked North Vietnam, we would win that war really quickly, but then that would also quickly transition into World War III, and Russia and China would probably nuke us, and no one wants that. But not even just our nukes. Our biggest, like, full-scale weapons of war, we're afraid that the more we escalate the war, the more likely it is that other large nations will be drawn into the war. So let's keep this small infantry battles. Like, seriously, we're not allowed to go full out war, even though they're doing their best against us. We can't do our best against them because that might make someone else angry. It's so frustrating. Here's LBJ, the mightiest nation in history, and he has all these giant weapons that he's not allowed to use. And here's a little Vietnamese farmer with a pistol that's winning the war. And that's what a lot of people felt like. Vietnam is just a bunch of poor farmers with hardly any equipment, hardly any training. We're the mightiest nation in history, and we have both hands tied behind our back, making it a very fair fight, when it really should not have been a fair fight at all. Often they call for reinforcements. The military says we need X number of troops to win this battle, and the politicians say, no, you can have half that many. But then we won't win if we don't have enough soldiers, and the politicians say, well, we don't want all out war, so do your best with what we give you and be thankful for what we give you. It was very difficult to tell if we were winning. Unlike in World War II, you could easily see the battle lines going forwards and backwards, forwards and backwards. One interesting thing about World War II is that we found serial codes on German tanks, and just by looking at the pattern of the serial codes, we could find out exactly how many tanks they were producing every month, which is pretty cool. So we knew exactly how many tanks they had, how many we destroyed, how many they have left. We have no idea what the Vietnamese military sizes or their fighting power, what kind of weapons they have. It is all very hard to tell. A lot of the Viet Cong have no uniforms at all. They pose as regular farmers and they pose as civilians, and then they whip out a machine gun and start shooting some people, with an AK-47 or something like that. We cannot tell if we're winning or not. It's such a difficult guerrilla fight. We never have any safe ground. Any ground that you cleared out previously might have a dozen sleeper agents in it. You only control the ground that you're standing on right now. which means we're going back and forth, clearing out the same valley every other week. And we capture this valley, then move on, and then they move back in, so we have to move back in, and it's just this huge mess and really difficult to tell, especially on a map, where we are and where they are. Guerrilla tactics work very well against a superior army. It's like in Pirates of the Caribbean. In a fair fight, I would have beaten you. Well, that's not much incentive to fight fair now, is it? They don't have uniforms. They have few real military bases. They're just stationed in their hometowns or in the middle of the desert in tents. And how can we find them and defeat them? We have no idea how many soldiers they have because we don't see their bases on satellites or anything, or aerial survey. It's dense jungle. We don't know what kind of weapons and supplies they have. We don't know where they are, how many they are, who they are. So we don't know if we're winning. All we know is that we're killing a lot of them and they're still fighting. We know that their nation is not that big, that they have probably not more than 1 million fighters, and we are mowing them down with the weapons that we have. But we don't know how many we're killing. We don't know how many are left. All we know is that we're killing a lot of them. Many people at home assume that we're stuck in a quagmire. That was the phrase tossed around a lot, that we are stuck in an unwinnable war that we'll never win, that we've been there for years and tens of thousands of Americans have died and we've had zero progress. In reality, we have had progress. It's just hard to tell. We've killed a lot of their forces. We've destroyed a lot of their fighting equipment. It's just really hard to tell how well we're winning. The military, our military leaders keep on saying North Vietnam is at the end of their rope. Their numbers are greatly diminished. Their capabilities are greatly diminished. We are winning. If we keep on going for a little bit farther, just keep on going a little bit more, we will defeat them. And people at home just didn't believe the military. So we called a 3-day truce to talk over some peace talks of the holiday of Tet. This is their version of Christmas. It's a huge deal, their biggest holiday, 3 days of feasting and food and family and all that. And we said, okay, what better time period than to call for peace? So there's this 3-day truce. And while we were playing nice and obeying the ceasefire and preparing for peace, they were not playing nice, and they had no intentions of preparing for peace during Tet. All throughout Tet, they were preparing to do a massive attack all up and down the country. They had a full-scale assault at every single key city, town, and military base all across the country. You can see all these dots. There is no place safe. Everyone gets attacked, breaking that truce. It was really bad. There were heavy casualties at many American and South Vietnam bases. However, we did not lose a single base. You see, all those red spots are American victories. They're hard-won victories, sure. Surprise attacks killed a lot of Americans and South Vietnamese, but every single one of those red dots is an American victory. There's several medals of honor given out during this Tet offensive. There's a story about this one sergeant. I forget his name, but I have the Medal of Honor book. I should bring that in. This one sergeant's in a base surrounded by barbed wire, and in the middle of the night, there's this explosion, and all of a sudden gunfire erupts, and all the soldiers rush to their banks. And one of the major fortifications of this were this base, little dugouts with mortar teams inside. Mortars have a very high trajectory, so it's okay if they're built underground, maybe just a 6-foot deep hole, 6-7 foot deep hole, with a 3-man mortar team in it. And this soldier wasn't sure what he was supposed to be doing. It's just chaos. So he dives into one of these mortar teams, and they're shooting off those mortars just as fast as he can. And he keeps on poking his head out and finding where the explosions were and saying, okay, a little to the left, a little right, a little forward, a little backward. And then they're shooting off their mortars so much they're running out of ammo. So he volunteers to go get more. So he races through the compound with bullets flying everywhere, grenades everywhere, and he grabs a crate of these mortars and runs back. Does this like for hours. He's running around. At one point, there's a grenade that falls into one of these mortar pits, and he picks it up and throws it back. And then 2 more fall in the exact same pit. He picks them up and throws them back, one in each hand. Pretty cool. There's one time he's running from mortar base to mortar base, and there's an explosion happens right very close to him, knocks him onto his back, has a few scratches, but he's okay. But his shoes are blown off of his feet. That's how close this explosion was. Keeps on going. One time he jumps into this mortar base because there's three bad guys who are aiming at him. They're hiding behind a tree stump. Jumps into this mortar base, and his foot lands right on a nail, and he gets a nail puncture right in the sole of his foot. And he calls out to that mortar team exactly where that tree stump was, and they blow it up and get those bad guys. He's just running around, getting ammunition, getting supplies, and encouraging the defenders. Several times he drags wounded soldiers to safety. And I think he got shot once or twice and got shrapnel everywhere. Didn't get injured too badly, but kept on going despite his injuries, despite all the danger he was in. So we got the Medal of Honor for that. It's pretty cool. So our military says North Vietnam is finished. The Tet Offensive was like the Battle of the Bulge. It was their last-ditch attempt. It could never have worked. Worst case scenario, they could have captured a couple of our bases, but there's no way they could have held on to them, and there's no way they could have won even half of these battles. They were doomed from the very beginning, and now we've killed so many of them in this massive battle. There's no way they could possibly keep on fighting at this scale ever again. They are done. But the American media says, see, this is proof the Vietnam War is far from over. If they can attack any town in Vietnam, we've made no victories. Not listening to the military. I know it is very frustrating. It's hard to tell the victories, but we are making huge progress. It really didn't help that for the first time, viewers at home saw the horrors of war, and the Vietnam War was horrific. There's just so much junk here that you don't even need to know about. Just a lot of death and destruction. And viewers are seeing that live and in color for the first time. A lot of people think the Vietnam War was especially bad. I really don't think it was. I think you could look at any horror of the Vietnam War and say that happened in World War II, that happened in Korea, that happened in World War I, that happened in the War of 1812, that happened in the Revolutionary War. There was a lot of bad stuff that's gone down in war, but most civilians had no idea, and now they're seeing pictures of it, and it's really disgusting. And they say, is the Vietnam War worth it? Walter Cronkite was America's best known and respected news anchor. This at a time where you have 2 or 3 channels on the TV, so there's not a lot of news sources to pick from. So when Walter Cronkite says something, everyone just believes him. And this was in a time where the news was much less politicized than it is now. So most people on all sides of the political spectrum listened and respected Walter Cronkite. CBS Evening News. And after the Tet Offensive, Walter Cronkite said, this war is unwinnable. We've made no progress. How long are we gonna kill and be killed for no purpose? And Nixon famously said, if I've lost Walter Cronkite, I've lost Middle America. And that is one of the big things that lost us the Vietnam War, was the American people turning against it. It's not a failure on the military's part necessarily. It's a failure on the politicians' part and the people's part who say we don't want to keep on fighting. Even though we've invested all this time and money and manpower and lives lost in the war, we don't want to keep on fighting. There's General Westmoreland. After the Tet Offensive, the politicians are breathing down his neck even more, telling him what to do, what he's allowed to do, what he's not allowed to do. And he says he feels like his hands are tied. He can't win the war with the politicians breathing down his neck. He asked for more bombing missions to step up the bombing, and politicians said no. He wants to attack the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is just outside the border. Politicians say, no, we're not invading Laos and Cambodia. No, you're not allowed to go down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, which is so frustrating because they're not playing nice, but we have to. They can get troops and supplies anywhere behind our lines, and they're doing bombings in civilian towns and cities. They're being terrorists, and we can't stop the terrorists because it's against the rules, which is just so frustrating. LBJ announced a reduction of bombings and calls for peace talks, and announced he wouldn't run again. Even though the North Vietnamese would not stop attacking, he did halt all bombing attacks. So we'll play nice if you play nice, and we reduce our fighting. They don't reduce their fighting. Again, these peace talks aren't really going anywhere if one side is not willing to talk at all. For 5 more years after that, we kept on fighting with very few clear objectives. Why are we here again? How do we know that we'll win? What is our next move? We really don't know. The politicians are not setting a clear objective because they hope to be out any day now. And we're not for another 5 years. Congress tries to negotiate. The North Vietnamese are obviously just stalling. They're not interested in negotiating. They're interested in fighting. But the longer they can keep Congress talking, the less we'll fight them, making ourselves an easier target. January 1973, it's been 8 years of fighting, seeming stalemates, and we finally signed a ceasefire, and we're gone by that March. We started evacuating, we're gone by March. Total of about 58,000 U.S. soldiers died in the Vietnam War, about 303,700 wounded, some of them severely wounded. By the way, the rise of plastic surgery in America started because of Vietnam. There were so many soldiers who were horrifically wounded that doctors said, how can we patch this guy's face up so that he can show his face in public again? And plastic surgery was greatly improved for Vietnamese war vets. Anyway, we have about 1,600 MIAs. There are plenty of prisoners that had really terrible treatment. Read about the Hanoi Hilton, is a nasty prisoner of war camp in Hanoi, North Vietnam. And some of those prisoners did not get released till a good while after the war. Maybe 1 million NVA and Viet Cong died. So when we look at the casualties, this is so one-sided. Yeah, 58,000 Americans is a lot of dead. That really is. Divide that by 8 years, though, and that's not a lot of casualties per year. And compare 58,000 on our side died and 1 million on their side died. That is so one-sided. How can the people say we're not winning the war? If we kept on going for another 8 years and we lost another 58,000 and they lost another 1 million, North Vietnam would be empty. They could not keep on going that long. Of course, at the time, we probably did not know that we even killed close to 1 million people. This is not until like a decade after the war that they released those numbers. Maybe 200,000 was the ARVN, Soldiers Army of the Republic of Vietnam, South Vietnam. So again, America is all out in this war, but we lost a quarter of the soldiers that our allies in South Vietnam lost. Here's the really sad part of it. You know, when you're a soldier, it's sad when soldiers die, but you know that they've accepted the risk. Although many Americans were drafted, so I don't know how willingly they accepted the risk. But you know, you're a soldier, you expect to get shot at. About 2 million civilians died, and that's not Southern civilians or Northern civilians. That's both sides. That's all the civilians who had nothing to do with the war. Maybe 2 million dead civilians. A lot of those were killed by American bombing raids. A lot of those were killed by communist terrorists. A lot of them were just killed in the crossfire. There's no safe place. There's no behind enemy lines. So sometimes firefights just erupted in the middle of a town. And, you know, at least in World War II, you know when an army is coming, you can run away, or you can try to run away behind the lines, one side or the other side. But you can't do that in Vietnam. There's nowhere to run to. There's no safe place. Who knows when your town will be blown up by one side or the other, or both. So, just going to leave this here. We went into Vietnam hoping to give them a better life, and 2 million civilians died, many of them by our hands, many of them by their hands. Not good, not good. Vietnam was our first defeat. We left losing. It was at least partially not a military defeat. It was a political defeat. Ford pardoned Nixon for his crimes at Watergate. Then Ford also goes on to give amnesty to deserters and draft dodgers. There were thousands, tens of thousands of Americans who ran away from the draft, either by physically running away to Canada or by making excuses or lying on certain things. Clinton was a draft dodger. Trump was a draft excuser. He was going to college for a long time. He got strings pulled so that he would not have to go to war. A lot of people, a lot of famous boomers on, every side of politics. I'm not making any political statement here. A lot of political, you know, a lot of people in politics in the boomers generation dodged the draft. Um, and some of them said it was their moral duty to not go to war that they felt was unjust. Many people said it's your moral duty to serve your country. Um, it's definitely very sad either direction. My grandfather, I don't remember if he was drafted but released or not. He had bad feet. He was not able to run. He had flat feet. So I don't know if he was able to run at all or not, but the doctors did not allow him to join the army. I don't know if he would have wanted to or not. I don't think he would have, but he didn't anyway. So a lot of people got mad at Ford for pardoning deserters and draft dodgers, but he did it. Ford also pulled out all of our troops. So we had gotten most of our troops out, and we had left a bunch of advisors and embassy workers and trainers and things like that. And Ford says they're all coming home, every single one of them. And we also got about 130,000 refugees out of Vietnam that we knew the communists would torture, kill, imprison. Who knows what they're going to do to these people. Among them is almost an entire ethnicity, a people group called the Hmong. They were a people without land. They did not own any land for hundreds of years. So think Israel wandering in the wilderness or in Egypt. You have an ethnicity, but they don't own any territory. Some of them lived in China or Laos or Cambodia or Vietnam. And they almost all, to a family, all joined the side of democracy and capitalism, anti-communism, and many of them helped America during the war. They worked as guards. They joined the ARVN, South Army. They worked as just workers. I read one story about a guy who helped build an airstrip. And for a couple months, he was employed by the U.S. Army just with a shovel and pick, building airstrips for the U.S. Army. In return for like the entire people group working for America and for the South, we offered them amnesty and refugee status. You can come to America. Unfortunately, a lot of them got shipped off to UN refugee camps for decades. And it wasn't until like the 90s that tens of thousands of them were brought from refugee camps in Africa all the way to America. Some families had been living in tents in UN camps for like 20 years before we brought them here. There is a huge Hmong population in Wisconsin. For whatever reason, I really don't know why. There were a bunch of them near Northland. That's pretty cool. There's a lot in San Francisco and up and down the West Coast because, came from that side of the world. And yeah, they're very strong American patriots today. Oh, you know who else was a Vietnam War patriot is the dude who invented sriracha. There is a really awesome documentary about sriracha sauce. I don't know if it's on YouTube or not, but it's really fun. Look it up sometime if you can. This guy was an immigrant, came to America and said, you know what I can make? I can make hot sauce. And it was so spicy. Everyone told him, Americans don't like hot sauce this spicy. They like more of a mild hot sauce. So if you change the recipe, you'll get more people eating it. And he said, nah, I'm going to keep my grandma's recipe. And eventually it became, America's best hot sauce ever. Pretty cool. So just 1 week after we left Saigon, and this famous picture is called The Last Helicopter Out of Saigon. You can see hundreds of people lined up trying to leave, and some of them are going to be left behind for the communists to find. Just 1 week after America left, the North Vietnamese entered Saigon, the capital of the South, and renamed it Ho Chi Minh City, and America is officially lost. All that fighting, all that death, what was it for? It had no lasting results. I'm not saying it was wrong to try. I do think we ought to have been there. But I think what's worse than not trying is trying, getting a bunch of people killed, and then giving up. Either take the fight or don't take the fight, but taking the fight, getting a bunch of people killed, and then losing, that's like the worst possible outcome. It's very, very frustrating. Cambodia and Laos also went full communist. And did America stop them? No. So Cambodia and Laos were almost in the exact same boat as Vietnam. The communists are taking over. The freedom lovers say, please help us. And America goes, no. we're not going to get into a second and third Vietnam just after the first one. So remember the domino theory, if Vietnam falls, all these other guys will fall as well. That kind of proved true, at least somewhat. When Vietnam fell to communism, so did several of its neighbors. Vietnam was a very modern born, so there are some brand new weapons and technology and stuff that we've used that we haven't really used before. Helicopters were used a little bit in Korea, but they're used extensively in the Vietnam War. They're used as close air support, the ground support, where they come in real close and they have their rockets and their missiles and their machine guns, and they just take out the enemy. We have our helicopter gunships. They're used to move the infantry around, which is super important. Vietnam's all jungle, very harsh terrain, very difficult to move anywhere. The roads are all mud, so very difficult to go in trucks on the ground. So mobile cavalry. And the background picture is a bunch of infantry being dropped off by helicopters. And so you just see fleets and fleets of helicopters coming in, dropping off 1,000 soldiers and taking off. Pretty cool. Medevacs were very common. If there's a firefight, they call in support, and here comes a Red Cross chopper. That giant Red Cross tells you that they are non-combatants. There are no weapons on board. They are not there to hurt anyone, and you're not supposed to shoot at anything with a Red Cross on it. Unfortunately, bad guys don't follow the rules. So a lot of medevac helicopter pilots were shot down. There was a chopper pilot who got a Medal of Honor because he just kept on going back in his medevac helicopter. He just kept on going back again and again and again, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in this really heavy firefight. And his chopper got all busted up. I think he got a bullet through the leg, and one of his legs is limp and unresponsive, and he keeps on going back for like 2 or 3 more missions. He says, I might be wounded, but there's people dying down there that I can save if I go in there. So, he's supposed to be a non-combatant, and he's getting shot at. Sure, you've heard of Agent Orange? Maybe you haven't. So it is a jungle out there, and so it's perfect hiding spots for the bad guys, and that made life very difficult for us. So we invented a chemical that could turn the jungle into a desert overnight. Yeah, it's an herbicide. So imagine a weed killer on steroids. You spray this junk all over the forest, and the jungle all shrivels up and all the leaves fall down overnight. It's gone. Now, it is an herbicide, it's a weed killer, it's meant to kill plants. But anything that powerful, imagine if you're there. So American soldiers will not be in the drop zone, but the next day American soldiers are racing through that territory, right? And then that gets into the rivers and the lakes and the food, and it can't be good for you. Yeah, it causes severe nerve damage. And we put a lot of it all over Vietnam. If you want to see some really creepy, scary stuff, just look up Agent Orange condition, and you will see kids born with terrible birth defects, people with cancer, people with nerve damage all over it. It's really, really nasty stuff. Many Vietnam vets have problems with their nerves and pain and other bad stuff due to Agent Orange. It was a nasty, nasty, nasty chemical, but it worked real well. Called a defoliant. It takes out all the foliage. There's a before and after. This is just a day or two after spraying the Agent Orange. It goes from a vibrant jungle to barren desert. That's creepy, the amount of damage that we can cause with just a couple airplanes. There's a little kid in that picture. Do you see him? Where's my laser pointer? It's a little kid right here. Imagine that's your hometown, and you have to live there, and that's getting in your drinking water. Not good. We bombed North Vietnam to smithereens, carpet bombing. We called it Operation Rolling Thunder. They had very, very few aircraft. The only aircraft they had were some Russian MiGs, and Russia didn't give them very many. But they had a lot of anti-aircraft machine guns. But we can usually fly higher than that. Their artillery and machine guns. They did have a lot of Russian surface-to-air missile sites, and those were very, very dangerous. So we had a whole group of fighters called the Wild Weasels, and their whole mission is to go shoot down surface-to-air missile sites. They're anti-aircraft aircraft. And their motto is YGBSM, which stands for "You Gotta Be Kidding Me." Only not kidding. Wild weasels, they're the crazy guys who have to go take out these anti-aircraft emplacements with aircraft. Very dangerous job. But they had a new type of missile. Other homing missiles would latch onto your heat signature because jet engines make a lot of heat, so they'd look for your engine and go blow it up, heat-seeking missiles. These new types of missiles are radar-seeking missiles. So you need radar to find enemy airplanes. These missile emplacements have pretty powerful radar, so you shoot a radar-seeking missile and it'll go blow up that radar site. Unfortunately, they knew that trick, so they would turn their radar off and just turn it on for a second, shoot their missile, turn their radar off again. So it's this game of cat and mouse, and this is a very dangerous job in the wild weasels. You gotta be kidding me. We dropped 7.5 million tons of explosives on Vietnam and its neighbors. And by the way, we're not allowed to invade into the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but we are allowed to carpet bomb them. That's whatever. We dropped double the amount of all the bombs dropped in World War II. Twice as much was dropped in Vietnam. Vietnam's very tiny compared to all of Europe and Asia that was bombed in World War II. This is an insane amount of bombs. We destroyed that country. We have not a brand new type of bomb, but a fairly new usage of napalm that's widespread. So napalm is gasoline with a gelling agent in it. So it's sticky jello gasoline. It causes massive fireballs. We used it a little bit for flamethrowers in World War II, but napalm bombs were highly effective anti-personnel. They won't explode big enough to like take out a tank, but they will cook anyone inside. That heat will kill anyone inside, a concrete pillbox. It's gonna get them. Here's a famous Vietnam picture of napalm. That's a big fireball. And we used, I don't know how many gallons of gasoline as napalm, but that's going to be a very large kill zone, isn't it? Maybe you've seen the famous picture of Napalm Girl. I've cropped it a little bit, but here's several children running away from a napalm attack. The one in the middle, she's completely naked. All her clothes have been burnt off. So I've cropped it a little bit there. But it's such a sad thing seeing the human toll. I'm sure we did not mean to bomb children, but we did. That Napalm Girl, by the way, she got on the cover of Time magazine, but she's alive today. She is a grandma, and there she is. There are multiple famous pictures of her through the years, and you could see massive scarring all across her upper body, and that's faded quite a bit through the years. But you can still see her shoulders and arms heavily burnt. It's really nice to see that she's still alive, and she's a grandma today after surviving the horrors of war firsthand.